Irene Ryan, remembered forever as the fiery granny on the Beverly Hillbillies, lived a life that seemed filled with laughter and success on the surface, but underneath the fame and applause was a story of hardship, loneliness, resilience, and ultimately a tragic end that shocked millions of devoted fans who never imagined that the woman who made them laugh so hard could herself be enduring so much pain. And to understand her journey we must go back to the very beginning when she was born Jessie Irene Noblet on October 17, 1902, in El Paso, Texas, into a modest working-class family where money was scarce but love for music, humor, and storytelling was strong, and even as a little girl, she found herself performing songs, dances, and little comedic sketches to entertain her family and neighbors, not knowing that those small living room acts were the seeds of a career that would one day make her a household name. Yet her childhood was not an easy one as her family struggled with financial insecurity and Irene often felt the pressure of wanting to help lift them out of hardship, a weight that pushed her toward performance as both passion and necessity. And by the time she was only 14 years old she had already begun her professional performing career, hitting the vaudeville stage with courage and ambition. A teenager surrounded by smoky theaters, rough audiences, and the relentless grind of constant touring, and while many might have crumbled under such circumstances, Irene thrived, especially after she partnered with her first husband Tim Ryan, a fellow vaudeville performer, with whom she created the act, Tim and Irene, a comedy duo that brought them moderate fame during the 1920s and 1930s as they traveled across America making audiences laugh during some of the darkest years of the Great Depression. Yet behind the stage lights and laughter, Irene's marriage to Tim was strained, filled with creative differences and personal conflicts that eventually broke them apart, and though their marriage ended in divorce, Irene refused to let that failure define her, continuing to build her career on her own terms, which was no easy feat for a woman in entertainment at that time when opportunities for female comedians and actresses were often limited to sidekick or supporting roles, but Irene's talent, wit, and determination made her stand out, landing her work in radio and eventually in film where she brought her sharp humor and expressive face to a range of character roles, even if true stardom seemed to elude her for decades, and while she earned respect within the industry as a reliable character actress, she lived most of her adult life without the fame or fortune many believed she deserved, a situation that might have broken the spirit of others but only made Irene more determined to keep pushing. Keep performing, keep waiting for the opportunity that would finally let her shine, and then, in 1962, when most actresses of her age were being pushed out of Hollywood, when 60-year-old women were expected to fade quietly into the background, Irene Ryan was handed the role that would forever change her life and make her immortal in television history. The role of Daisy Mae Moses, better known to the world simply as Granny, the feisty, sharp-tongued matriarch of the Clampett family on the Beverly Hillbillies, a sitcom that network executives had little faith in but which would go on to defy every expectation and become one of the most watched and most beloved shows of the 1960s, and suddenly, after nearly half a century of grinding through the entertainment world, Irene Ryan was catapulted to stardom, her face appearing in millions of American living rooms every week as audiences roared with laughter at her antics, her fierce one-liners, and her unforgettable delivery that turned Granny into the beating heart of the Clampett clan. And while critics often dismissed the show as lowbrow, audiences loved it, pushing it to the #1 spot on television for multiple seasons. And Irene herself became a two-time Emmy nominee, adored by fans and respected by peers who marveled at how she could so completely steal every scene she was in, embodying Granny with such authenticity that people often forgot she was acting. Yet behind that television success Irene's personal life remained strikingly quiet, for she never remarried after her divorce, never had children, and while she was surrounded by castmates who adored her and fans who idolized her, she often returned home to an empty house, carrying a loneliness that she rarely let the public see, channeling instead all of her energy into her craft, into perfecting her character, into making sure that the audiences who tuned in each week felt joy, and that balance between public adoration and private solitude became a defining rhythm of her later life. And though she had achieved the fame she had once only dreamed about, it came late and at the cost of years of anonymity, and now that she finally had it, she seemed determined not to let it go, pouring herself into her performances even as her body began to weaken with age. Yet even after the Beverly Hillbillies ended in 1971, Irene was not ready to fade into retirement, instead choosing to take on new challenges, proving she was more than Granny by stepping onto the Broadway stage in the musical Pippin in 1972, where she stunned audiences with her charisma, comedic timing, and powerful singing voice, and critics who had long pigeonholed her as a one-note sitcom character were forced to admit that Irene Ryan was a true talent who could hold her own on any stage. Yet behind the curtain her health was failing, her body betraying her even as she delivered applause-worthy performances night after night, and then came the moment that would signal the beginning of her tragic end. During a performance of Pippin, Irene suddenly collapsed on stage, shocking the cast, the crew, and the audience who had come to see her shine. And though she brushed it off at first, insisting she could keep going, doctors soon delivered the devastating diagnosis. Irene Ryan was suffering from glioblastoma, an aggressive and deadly form of brain cancer, and the disease was already far advanced, leaving her with little time and few options. Yet Irene, ever the performer, refused to let the public see her weakness, insisting on working as long as she could, keeping up appearances, and protecting her fans from the sadness she herself was feeling. But within weeks her condition deteriorated rapidly, the tumor stealing her strength, her clarity, her ability to live independently, and finally, on April 26, 1973, at just 70 years old, Irene Ryan passed away, her death a crushing blow to her fans, her colleagues, and to an entertainment industry that had only just begun to fully recognize the depth of her talent. And at her funeral, attended by castmates, friends, and admirers, people spoke not only of her comedic genius but of her kindness, her generosity, and her unshakable work ethic. And though she left behind no children, she left behind something perhaps even more lasting: a legacy of laughter and an estate that funded the Irene Ryan Acting Scholarship, a program dedicated to supporting young actors in theater competitions, ensuring that her passion for performance would live on through future generations. A final act of generosity from a woman who had spent her life giving joy to others. And today, when fans watch reruns of the Beverly Hillbillies and laugh at Granny's antics, when theater students receive scholarships in her name, when historians look back at women in comedy who defied the odds, Irene Ryan's name still shines. Yet her story remains bittersweet, for here was a woman who spent decades clawing her way through vaudeville, radio, and film, who found fame only late in life, who brought joy to millions but lived with private loneliness, who collapsed under the weight of an illness she never asked for, and whose tragic end cut short a career that still had so much more to give. And in that contrast lies the heartbreaking truth of Irene Ryan's life. A woman who gave everything to her art, who never stopped fighting for her place on the stage, and who, despite the sadness that shadowed her end, remains immortal every time Granny raises her voice on the screen. A timeless reminder that even the brightest stars often burn the most painfully just before they fade into darkness.